Picture this. It's Sunday night, you're staring at your banking app, doing mental math, and you realize something brutal. You do have investments, but you still don't feel safe. Because if life hits you this week, your plan is to sell, and that's the trap. Here's the truth most people never learn. The middle class builds wealth by selling. The wealthy build wealth by owning. We're taught buy low, sell high, like that's the whole game. But in real life, selling is usually not a strategy, it's a reaction. And reactions are expensive. Let's make it painfully concrete. Imagine someone who's finally built a $25,000 portfolio. It took them years. Then a normal life problem happens. The car dies, rent jumps, or they get laid off. They sell $5,000 just to get through the month. What do they lose? They lock in the loss of future compounding on that chunk of money. They may trigger taxes on gains at the exact moment they needed cash. And worst of all, they train their brain to treat investing like a break-glass emergency fund. So the portfolio never becomes an engine, it becomes a piggy bank you keep smashing. Now, my name is Alex, and I've spent the last decade studying the invisible forces that control how we think about money. Not market forces or interest rates, but the psychological programming that happens before we're old enough to understand what money even is. According to financial psychology research, approximately 70% of our money decisions are driven by unconscious programming rather than rational analysis. That's not a typo. 7 out of every 10 financial choices you make aren't really yours at all. If that idea hits a nerve, subscribe, because this channel is about breaking that programming and replacing it with a system that actually works. And if this video helps you see your money differently, hit like. It tells the algorithm to show it to more people who need it. Back to the point. The buy step isn't just purchasing an asset. The real buy step is designing your life so you don't have to sell your best assets to fund normal life. That requires one shift. You separate survival money from wealth-building money. Because when your rent, emergencies, and random life problems are all competing with your long-term investments, your investments will always lose. You'll sell at the worst times, for the wrong reasons, and you'll wonder why investing doesn't work. When you build a life where selling isn't the default, two things happen. Compounding finally gets uninterrupted time to do its job. Your brain stops operating in panic mode, and you start making proactive decisions instead of defensive ones. And that's the foundation for everything that comes next. Because once you understand why selling is the trap, step 2 starts to make sense. Wealthy people don't fund their lifestyle by selling their best assets. They get spendable money without liquidating. Now let's talk about the part that sounds impossible until you see how it works. Borrow. Here's where this strategy starts to sound fake. Wealthy people often don't sell their best assets to get spending money. They borrow against them. If you own an asset that's growing, stocks, real estate, a business, you can use it as collateral. A lender looks at your asset and says, "We'll lend you cash because you already have value backing it." So instead of doing this, sell the asset, pay taxes, shrink your portfolio, they do this. Keep the asset, borrow cash, keep compounding alive. And the key detail is simple. Borrowing money isn't the same as earning money. A loan isn't income, it's debt. That's why, when it's used correctly, it can feel like spending without selling. But this is also the step where people get destroyed, so let's not romanticize it. Let me show you the nightmare scenario in one scene. You borrow against your portfolio because you think, "It's fine, I'm not selling." Then the market drops hard. Your account value falls, and one morning you wake up to a message that basically says, "Add more collateral or we start selling your assets for you." That's the part nobody puts on the thumbnail. Because when collateral drops, lenders don't care about your long-term plan. They care about their risk today.
If you borrowed too aggressively, a downturn can force you to liquidate at the worst possible moment, exactly what Chapter 1 warned about. So yes, borrowing can let you access cash without selling, but it can also backfire fast if the system isn't built for stress. Here are the three real dangers in plain English. Interest can turn into a slow bleed. If borrowing costs too much, you're paying a wealth tax every month just to keep the loan alive. Your collateral can fall when you least expect it. Markets drop, real estate cools, businesses hit rough periods. If the collateral falls, the lender's rules get stricter. Borrowing can become a lifestyle addiction. If you borrow to fund consumption, cars, vacations, flex spending, you don't build wealth, you build fragility. So, what do wealthy people do differently? They treat borrowing like a tool you use conservatively, not a lifestyle you depend on. They build buffers. They plan for a bad year. They borrow in a way that still lets them sleep at night if the market gets ugly. Because the real purpose of borrow isn't free money. It's time. Time to keep your best assets working. Time to avoid selling. Time to let compounding keep running while life keeps happening. And once you understand that, step 3 stops sounding morbid and starts sounding like the endgame. Because the strategy isn't always designed around paying the loan off next year. It's designed around what happens to taxes when ownership transfers. Now let's talk about the final step, die. This is the part people don't like saying out loud, but it's the part that makes the whole strategy make sense. The end game isn't sell later, and it's not pay back the loan next year. The end game is you hold the asset for life, and when ownership changes hands, the tax math can reset. Here's the U.S. rule that matters. When assets pass to heirs, they can receive a step-up in basis. Translation, the IRS can treat the asset like it was bought at its market value around the date of death. So a huge chunk of the old, unrealized capital gain may no longer be sitting there waiting to be taxed. Let's make it real with one tight example. Someone buys shares for $1 million. Over decades, it grows to $10 million. If they sell while alive, that $9 million gain is now a taxable event. But if they don't sell, if they borrow against it to fund life, then that gain stays unrealized. No sale, no capital gains trigger. The asset keeps compounding. Then ownership transfers to heirs. With a step-up, the new starting point can become close to $10 million. So, if the heirs sell soon after inheriting, the taxable gain can be small because the basis was reset near the top. That's the punchline. The strategy isn't avoid taxes forever. It's avoid realizing the gain for decades and potentially wipe out tax on that old growth when the baton gets passed. Now, here's the part that keeps this from being a fairy tale. What about the loan? The debt doesn't disappear. It gets handled by the estate. Sometimes that means paying it off with cash. Sometimes it means selling part of the assets. Sometimes heirs refinance. But the bill is real, and the timing matters. So the trade is basically this. You might reduce capital gains taxes on decades of appreciation, but you're carrying debt and risk to get there. And this is where the moral contrast hits. A regular worker gets paid, taxes come out immediately, every paycheck. An asset owner can often choose when the tax event happens, and if they're wealthy enough to never be forced to sell, they can push that moment so far out that the rules at transfer do the heavy lifting. That's why people call it controversial, not because it's magic, but because it rewards the one thing most people don't have, enough assets to hold forever without blinking. So, buy, borrow, die isn't a hack for everyone. It's a blueprint for how the ultra-wealthy can live on loans instead of selling, keep the compounding machine intact, pass assets forward under rules that can reset the gain. Buy, borrow, die sounds like a 3-step cheat code. But it's not a hack.
It's a system. And if you don't have the right inputs, the system doesn't kind of work, it breaks. Because the main risk here isn't taxes. The main risk is getting forced to sell. Most people hear borrow against your portfolio and think, cool, cash without selling. But the real question is, what happens when two things hit at once? Your life gets expensive and your assets drop. That's when the lender doesn't ask how you feel. They ask for collateral. And if you don't have it, they sell your assets for you, right at the bottom. So here's the honest divide. This strategy is built for people who have big, stable assets, multiple income streams, or deep liquidity, the ability to borrow conservatively and still live fine, enough buffer to survive a nasty year without panic moves. And it's dangerous for people who treat debt like income, need markets to rise on schedule, live close to the edge, where one bad month creates a forced decision. Use leverage to fund lifestyle instead of building the base. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The superpower isn't borrowing. The superpower is having enough margin of safety that you can borrow small, wait long, ignore volatility, and never be forced to sell. So if a viewer is thinking, should I do this? The better question is, am I building the kind of asset base where I'll never need to sell in a crisis? Because for most people, the practical takeaway isn't live on loans forever. It's this: build assets that can compound. Avoid selling just to fund impulsive consumption. Be careful with leverage. Make taxes a factor, not a steering wheel. And that's the real reason buy, borrow, die is controversial. It doesn't reward hustle. It rewards ownership. Here's the uncomfortable truth. This game doesn't reward effort. It rewards ownership. If you own assets, you can choose when to take the tax hit. If you sell your time, the tax hit chooses you. Buy, borrow, die isn't a hack for everyone. It's a system for people with enough margin of safety to never be forced sellers. That's the real flex. Not the car, not the watch, the ability to wait. So if you want the cheat code, stop hunting for loopholes and start building the thing loopholes protect, a compounding base you don't have to sell. Buy what grows. Borrow carefully, if at all. Let time do the heavy lifting. And when the rules feel unfair, remember, the rules weren't written for hustle. They were written for owners.